In the days when the judges ruled, before Israel had a king to unite her tribes, the land was marked by cycles of disobedience and deliverance, of famine and fleeting peace. It was in such a time that Bethlehem, the house of bread, was struck by hunger, the soil yielding little, and the barns standing empty. Ruth 1 verse 1. Families looked upon their fields with despair, and the women ground grain in vain, for there was little to sustain them. Elimelech, a man of Bethlehem in Judah, considered the plight of his household and resolved to journey eastward, beyond the Jordan, into the land of Moab. With him went Naomi, his faithful wife, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Moab was not without its shadows, for its people were born of Lot's troubled lineage, Genesis 19 verse 37, and had stood in enmity with Israel more than once. Yet there the famine had not struck with equal severity, and in Moab's valleys bread could still be found. So Elimelech and Naomi sojourned there, strangers among a foreign people, their hope being only to survive until the Lord once more visited his people in Bethlehem. But their hopes soon turned to sorrow, for Elimelech died in that land. Ruth 1 verse 3. Naomi, bereft of her husband, leaned upon her sons, who in time took wives of the Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. For a season, life was steadied, though Naomi remained a widow in a strange land. Yet after about 10 years, tragedy deepened, for Mahlon and Chilion both died, leaving no children behind. Ruth 1 verse 5. Thus Naomi stood doubly bereft, her household reduced to herself and her 2 foreign daughters-in-law. The weight of sorrow pressed hard upon her, and she heard whispers in her soul that the Almighty's hand was heavy against her. Yet amid her grief came a glimmer of news from her homeland. The Lord had once more given bread to his people in Bethlehem. Ruth 1 verse 6. So Naomi resolved to return to Judah, to walk back along the road of her youth, though she would go empty of the family with which she had departed. On that road she turned to Orpah and Ruth, urging them to remain in Moab. Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead, and with me. Ruth 1 verse 8. With tears she blessed them, saying, The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Ruth 1 verse 9. The 3 women wept together. Orpah, though sorrowful, at length kissed Naomi and returned to her people. But Ruth clung to her, holding her arm as if to say she could not be torn away. Naomi pressed her again, saying, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. Ruth 1 verse 15. Yet Ruth's answer was a vow that shook earth and reached heaven. Entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou deest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Ruth 1 verses 16 to 17. When Ruth spoke these words, angels who had borne witness to Abraham leaving Ur, and to Jacob vowing at Bethel, now beheld a Moabite widow embracing the God of Israel with unshakable devotion. Her voice, though trembling with human sorrow, rose like incense before the throne of the Almighty. Heaven's host marveled, for here was the grafting of a foreign branch into the covenant tree, a sign of what was yet to come in God's great plan of redemption. Some among the angelic watchers recalled the psalm yet to be sung. The Lord doth build up Jerusalem. He gathereth together the outcasts of Israel. Psalm 147 verse 2. In Ruth they saw a first fruit of this gathering, and they lifted songs of praise unseen by the travelers. So Naomi returned to Bethlehem, and Ruth with her, stepping into the land of Judah with feet that had never before walked its soil. When the city stirred at Naomi's arrival, the women whispered, Asterisk, is this Naomi? Asterisk, but she said, Asterisk, call me not Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Asterisk. Ruth 1 verses 20 to 21. To Naomi's eyes, her life was stripped bare. Yet in heaven's courts it was not emptiness but planting. For God was preparing to bring forth fullness through the faith of her Moabite daughter. It was the beginning of barley harvest. Ruth 1 verse 22. the season when reapers moved through the fields with sickles, leaving gleanings for the poor and the stranger. Ruth, desiring to provide for Naomi, asked leave to glean, saying, "Let me now go to the field, and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace." Ruth 2 verse 2. Naomi gave consent, and Ruth went out into the fields. By what seemed chance but was in truth providence, her steps led her into the portion of land belonging to Boaz, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech. Ruth 2 verse 3. As Ruth bent low among the sheaves, angels who had seen manna fall in the wilderness now beheld a poor widow gather barley in faith. The same God who once sustained a nation with bread from heaven now guided Ruth's hands as she gleaned among the stalks. Soon Boaz came from Bethlehem to visit his reapers, and his first words were blessing, "The Lord be with you." Ruth 2 verse 4. They answered, "The Lord bless thee." His eyes turned upon Ruth, and he asked, "Whose damsel is this?" The foreman explained how she was the Moabite woman who had returned with Naomi, and how diligently she had gleaned since morning. Then Boaz spoke kindly to Ruth, telling her not to stray to other fields, but to remain close to his maidens, and to drink when she thirsted from the vessels his young men had drawn. Ruth 2 verses 8 to 9. Overwhelmed by such favor, Ruth bowed low and said, "Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger?" Ruth 2 verse 10. Boaz replied with words that fell upon her heart like rain upon thirsty ground. "It hath fully been shewed me, all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother, and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. Ruth 2 verses 11 to 12. As he spoke of the wings of God, the angels themselves who minister around his throne gave assent, for they had long known those wings that sheltered Israel in the wilderness. Exodus 19 verse 4. Deuteronomy 32 verse 11. Now Ruth, once of Moab, was gathered beneath them, and heaven's host lifted their voices in praise. That day Ruth ate at Boaz's table, dipping bread and being satisfied, and gathering enough to take home to Naomi. Ruth 2 verses 14 and 18. Naomi, hearing of Boaz's kindness, exclaimed, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." Ruth 2 verse 20. For she recognized Boaz as a near kinsman, one able by the law of redemption to preserve Elimelech's line. Thus hope began to stir again in Naomi's heart, though she scarcely perceived how great a redemption God was preparing. And all the while, the hosts of heaven watched, beholding how in the ordinary labors of gleaning and kindness, the Eternal was weaving a thread into the lineage that would bring forth his anointed one.
As the harvest days waned and the threshing floor became the place of winnowing, Naomi turned to Ruth with counsel born of both wisdom and faith. She said, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley to-night in the threshing floor." Ruth 3 verses 1 to 2. Naomi instructed her to wash, anoint herself, and put on her best raiment, to go down to the floor but not make herself known until Boaz had finished eating and drinking. Then she was to mark the place where he lay, uncover his feet, and lay down, and he would tell her what to do. Ruth 3 verses 3 to 4. Ruth, in humility and obedience, answered, "All that thou sayest unto me I will do." Ruth 3 verse 5. So under the cover of night she went, the moon bearing witness and unseen watchers following in silence, marveling at the trust she placed in Naomi's words and the God who ordered her steps. When Boaz had eaten and his heart was merry, he lay down at the end of the heap of corn. Ruth came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay herself down. At midnight Boaz was startled and turned, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who art thou?" And she answered, "I am Ruth thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman." Ruth 3 verse 9. In those simple words lay both petition and covenantal trust. For Ruth sought not mere provision but redemption according to the law of Israel. Boaz's voice was gentle, filled with admiration. Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter. For thou hast shewed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followedst not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. Ruth 3 verses 10 to 11. Above them, in the unseen realm, angelic hosts who had watched covenant promises unfold through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, now witnessed a Moabite widow lay herself down at the feet of a Redeemer. They marveled, for it was a shadow of the greater mystery to come, that all who would seek refuge beneath the covering of the Messiah would find redemption. Heaven praised the righteousness of Boaz, who sought not his own gain but acted according to the law. Yet even as Ruth hoped, Boaz declared that there was a nearer kinsman, one who had first right to redeem. He promised to settle the matter in the morning, and he blessed her before the Lord. Ruth 3 verses 12 to 13. Ruth arose before dawn, carrying 6 measures of barley given by Boaz for Naomi, a pledge of his goodwill. Naomi, hearing the report, assured Ruth, "Sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall, for the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day." Ruth 3 verse 18. So Boaz went up to the city gate, the place where judgments were given and transactions sealed. He sat there, and behold, the nearer kinsman passed by. Boaz called 10 elders of the city to witness and then spoke to the kinsman, explaining Naomi's land and the right to redeem it. Ruth 4 verses 1 to 3. The man first agreed to redeem, but when Boaz declared that the redemption included taking Ruth the Moabitess as wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, the man declined, fearing to mar his own inheritance. Ruth 4 verses 5 to 6. Thus the right passed to Boaz. The custom in Israel for such transactions was the removal of a shoe, and so the kinsman drew off his sandal, sealing the matter before the elders. Ruth 4 verses 7 to 8. Then Boaz declared, "Ye are witnesses this day, that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's, of the hand of Naomi. Moreover Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance." Ruth 4 verses 9 to 10. The elders and all the people at the gate responded with blessing. "We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem, and let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman." Ruth 4 verses 11 to 12. Their words echoed through time, for they unknowingly spoke of the seed that would indeed bring forth the King of Kings. Angels who listened to those blessings lifted them higher, weaving them into their celestial chorus, for they foresaw that through Ruth's womb would come Obed, Jesse, David, and at last the Messiah, the Redeemer of all nations. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. The Lord granted her conception, and she bore a son. Ruth 4 verse 13. Naomi, once emptied, now cradled fullness in her arms. The women of Bethlehem rejoiced with her, saying, "Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age." Ruth 4 verses 14 to 15. Naomi laid the child upon her bosom and cared for him as her own. They called his name Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Ruth 4 verse 17. Thus the story that began with famine and loss in Moab ended with joy and legacy in Bethlehem. Yet what no eye among men could see in full, the hosts of heaven perceived with awe, that Ruth, the widow of Moab, had become a matriarch in the line of the Messiah. They who had sung at creation, who had rejoiced at the birth of Isaac, who had ministered as Jacob dreamed, now exulted at this mystery, that God would bring forth his anointed through a woman once counted an outsider. The angels saw in Ruth's vow, in her gleaning, in her resting at Boaz's feet, and in her marriage covenant, the foreshadowing of that greater bride who would one day cling to Christ. the kinsman redeemer. They foresaw Bethlehem's hills again filled with song, when shepherds would hear, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." Luke 2 verse 14. And so the scroll of Ruth closes not with mere genealogy but with a proclamation of God's faithfulness. For Ruth, the stranger, was gathered into Israel, and from her came David, the beloved king, and from David's line came Jesus, the Christ, the Son of the living God. The story that began with Naomi's bitterness and Ruth's devotion became a tapestry of redemption, earthly and cosmic. And even now the hosts of heaven praise the wisdom of the Almighty, who weaves the poor and the foreigner into his royal line, who brings fullness from emptiness, and who prepares salvation for all people through the most unexpected vessels.